Thanks for being here, Growth Institute. We're going to talk about special issues with church and family tonight. As we do so, I want to take a minute to begin by praying. We've got a number of people a part of our church family who are struggling with health issues. Julie continues to send out prayer updates. And just with the nature of this going long-term online, I'm not going to give all those updates in there. But let's continue to pray for those that are involved. And the Lord knows how to heal, how to work, and how to bring comfort. So we can talk more afterwards if you want to. God, we thank you for church family. The way in which we relate to one another, are cared for by one another, and the way we can lift our cares to you about what's happening with one another. God, give doctors and nurses your wisdom and your gracious power to work in the bodies and the minds of those that are struggling. God, give a peace that surpasses all comprehension. Would it truly guard the hearts and minds of their family members? And would you be with them in their sedated states and their struggling states? God, I don't know what's going on in their heart and in their mind and their consciousness and unconsciousness at this time, but God, your Spirit knows exactly how to care for your creation that is so special to us, is even more special to you. So God, would you display your care and your grace, and would our people testify to the hope that they have even in dark struggles with their loved ones? So in your name we pray. Amen. All right, so hopefully tonight I'm going to advertise my goal so that I can be held accountable for not achieving my goal should I not do it. My goal is for us to actually have some discussion tonight. A lot of times I have discussion questions, but I don't actually allow time for discussion. I'm really bad at managing discussion because I don't lead discussion from the pulpit. So I tend to teach this more like I'm preaching than discussion, but hopefully we can have some discussion tonight. So our scope for tonight, I want to talk about church and families to start off with. And those issues related to it is the church a family of families? What's the relationship between the family and the church? Should the church keep the family together? Those types of questions. And I want to look at some special issues within the family, including having children for the glory of God, special issues related to attempting to have children or not have children, and raising children for the glory of God. And even then, if we get into it, I want a little time on raising parents for the glory of God. Intentionally nebulous title on that, and it's at the end, so we may not get too far in that discussion. But that's where we're going tonight. I understand Pastor Sam shared with you last week on ethics and trying to be biblical in all that we do, and making sure that we honor the Lord in the way that we think about things, that all of our life is to be lived under the grace of God and for the glory of God. I want us to first start tonight as we think about honoring God by thinking about the relationship of the church and family. Three key passages there for us to look at. Looking sequentially through the scriptures, Matthew chapter 10. So if you got a Bible, go ahead and navigate Matthew chapter 10 for what Jesus has to say that does not seem to just be about the family in and of itself. So we're going to look at all three of those passages, then we'll talk about how those three passages relate. So can I get a volunteer for Matthew, then a volunteer for the John passage, and then a volunteer for the First Timothy passage?
I'll be Matthew.
All right, thank you, Miss Nancy. John? Who's going to read? All right. And who's going to read First Timothy?
I have come to bring peace in.
Hold on one second, Miss Nancy. Who's going to do First Timothy? All right, thank you.
So you want
All right, now, Matthew 10:34 through 37.
Do not think that I have come to bring peace on earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to set a man against his father, and daughter against her mother, and daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a man's foes will be those of his own household. He who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and he who loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me.
Okay. So just a quick summary of that passage is nuclear family is not to triumph over our relationship with the Lord. And by implication, I would say even there's some relationships within the church that are also really, really important in this. But nuclear family is not to triumph over the relationship with the Lord. All right? John 19:25 through 27.
But standing by the cross of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to his mother, "Woman, behold your son." Then he said to the disciple, "Behold your mother." And from that hour, the disciple took her to his own home.
Okay. So despite what Jesus said in Matthew, it's not that he has a disregard for the nuclear family, but in this case, he is giving of his mother, or his mother to John, John to his mother to take care of each other. There. All right, 1 Timothy 5, 1 through 8, Paul's instructions.
Do not rebuke an older man, but encourage him as you would a father. Younger men as brothers, older women as mothers, younger women as sisters, in all purity. Honor widows who are truly widows. But if a widow has children or grandchildren, let them first learn to show godliness to their own household, and to make some return to their parents, for this is pleasing in the sight of God. She who is truly a widow, left all alone, has set her hope on God, and continues in supplications and prayers night and day.
Go on through verse 8, please.
But she who is self-indulgent is dead, even while she lives. Command these things as well, so that they may be without reproach. But if anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for members of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever.
Okay. Variety of roles being described here in the church, and how we are to care for one another in the church with things that we learn in the nuclear family and the extended family. So, the Bible is communicating here about both nuclear family and church family, with relationships between the two where neither one obliterates the other. Although some would lean or suggest very strongly that only the nuclear family or only the church family, or the church is a family of families. There's an aspect of truth to the concept of the church as a family of families, when the family unit is not considered to only be husband, wife, and kids, but recognizing that singles are family units, that widows are family units, that grandparents without kids in the home anymore that are still married are family units. But the church is not just a group of families functioning together. Although there are things we learn from the nuclear family, as it suggests in 1 Timothy 5, we relate to one another as things we are supposed to be learning in the nuclear family. You see Jesus honoring some aspects of the nuclear family and his own mother, getting her taken care of in John 19 through John. But in Matthew 10, we're told that the nuclear family should not be your first and greatest priority. That should be on the Lord. Okay? And the pursuit of him and what he commands. That becomes a very valuable text in Matthew chapter 10 for our friends that are converting to the Lord from other religions, particularly religions that highly honor the nuclear family and extended family, and talk about bringing shame upon those who reject the things of their family's faith. For example, those coming from a Muslim background often have to be shunned or completely ignored, or in some cases flee the persecution that they would face from their own family when they trust in the things of the Lord. So that passage in Matthew is incredibly valuable for those that come from a worldview that honors the family above all else. But in our American individualistic tendencies, we like to take that one and say, well, that means I have no responsibility for my family. It's just me and Jesus, and whatever Jesus calls me to do, it's me and Jesus. Never mind that Jesus might want me to relate to my nuclear family, because it's just me and Jesus. So that's why I went over to John to see about Jesus' relationship within nuclear family and what we can learn from the nuclear family that should impact how we are to live in the church, including taking care of one another, including the expectations that families take care of each other. And I would say, to the extent when the nuclear family is no longer able to or needs support from the church family, the church family comes in and supports greatly. Okay. By the way, another reason that the church is not a family of families, I've already started on it, so I'll just give you the answer, is because the church is composed only of those that are regenerate or believers in Christ. Not everyone's children are believers. Not everyone's spouse is a believer. Not everyone's grandparents are believers. Okay? So the local church is only the regenerate. It's only believers. So those that do not believe, maybe yet, are not part of the family of faith, though they are cared for and should be cared for as part of those attending a local church. Yeah.
What about in like a broader context of like a local church versus the church at large? Could that be considered families of families?
Would I consider the church at large families of families?
Well, like you got a local church,
Mhm.
and then you got like a broader church.
Yeah. Universal?
Yes.
Yeah, church universal. So is the church universal composed of local churches? Yes. And is that kind of like family of families?
Yeah.
Yes, kind of. And I would be okay with that, because the church universal is composed of all regenerate believers across, which would be duplicating terms, but all regenerate across space and time. Yeah. But the church is not just a family. Okay? This becomes important when we get into a question in just a minute. But I want to note some things from Kostenberger's book. I think it's valuable in this one. He notes that in many ways we have more in common with those of the local congregation than we do with natural relatives, especially relatives that do not share the same faith. And he articulates that the New Testament concept of the church as family transcends but does not delete flesh and blood ties. Transcends but does not delete flesh and blood ties. By the way, I think this is important to note, and I'll try to note it a couple other times as we go throughout tonight. Those called to singleness, whether presently or forever, should be viewed as kingdom units on par with families, rather than saying that, hey, only families really reflect God's intention. Okay? Jesus was single, and that was God's intention. Don't want to spend a ton of time on this question because of our audience tonight, and because our church, I don't think, is really having a big debate on this one. But there are churches and pastors that write things like I dealt with in my PhD dissertation that say things like, we should fire every youth pastor in America tomorrow because youth pastors are not biblical, because the church should gather together, because that's what happened in the early church. Therefore, the churches should gather together, families should stay together, and they should learn together. And they don't just say that gently. Some do say that gently. Others say it with much vitriol and anger at those that would employ such unbiblical positions as a youth pastor. because they think that youth should learn only in the concepts or only in the confines of parents. In most cases, what they mean by that also is that dad should be the leader on that pew and mom should be there and then kids should be there. Is that God's desire for the nuclear family to be all in love with the Lord, attending worship together and celebrating Him? Yes. Is that the broken world that we live in? That's not the broken world we live in. And that also assumes a lot about God's electing nature and His bringing of salvation to the entire family. Which is curious because most of the churches that do make those types of statements actually have an extremely high view of the providence of God in salvation and His electing and predestining nature, and yet they essentially restrict the normal of Christian worship to those that, in their mind, God has elected all of them in the family. It's a real odd curveball between their soteriology and their ecclesiology that essentially assumes that if your whole family isn't there, then you're like really failing. So we can have another tangential discussion on those at another point. But that discussion is out there. That movement is largely called the family integrated church. It's where the church is composed of families. I think there's some value in those things. I think there's some things to be learned from churches that try to not just separate the family. I think Jacob and I have had this discussion. I know my wife and I had a discussion. There's a church in our area that I have deeply respected their doctrine and their heart for missions, but I recently found out that they have separated their youth from their Sunday morning worship service. I think it happened during COVID or because of something at some point, maybe a space constraint or something like that, but they now no longer have any indication of ever having their youth with adults on Sunday morning for church. Their youth will never be with adults in the church building other than walking in. Once you walk in, there's youth church, not just children's church, not just preschool church, there's youth church. And I've got a problem with that model of church that caters only to one crowd. I'm guessing in 10 more years that same type of model will lead to the college church and the young adult church that they have on their campus. And in 30 more years will result in a senior adult church and a medium age family church and a single adult church and a youth church, where church is not about multiple varieties of people learning from each other, gathering together as a family of faith, but instead is the division of the family into separate spheres all the time for the efficiency of ministry. And often it is the word efficiency that is at stake in that. So, now, I've pushed on one side, but at the same time, like, we have a youth pastor. We have a youth pastor who's doing a good job, but we do have our youth with our adults at some point. So we are coming down somewhat down the middle in that discussion as to whether the family unit should always be together or never be together when they gather at church. What are some of the benefits that come to mind for you, or biblical things that come to mind for you? Benefits or biblical, I'll be okay with either way. Since I just picked on them, for the family not being together to learn. What are some benefits of the family not being together to learn the things of the Lord? Distraction. Yeah.
Targeted lessons.
Targeted lessons. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so distraction. It's hard to learn, as my wife used to tell me. It's really hard when the kids are like crawling everywhere and want to scream, and your like primary job is to keep them from being a distraction to everybody else in the church, to not be distracted yourself. Okay? All right, distraction, targeted lessons. I'm confident that though the theology of what Pastor Jacob teaches and has conversations with our youth about is the same as the theology of what he would do if he was teaching senior adult class. I'm confident also that there are discussions at times about things that our senior adults are totally unaware of, like Snapchat. Okay? Now, is that the impetus of a lesson? Let's talk about Snapchat. No, let's talk about the Bible. And what does it mean to let no unwholesome talk come out of your mouth? Okay? What are the implications for glorifying God on Snapchat versus on the telephone? Okay?
If you don't understand it, it's going to go over your head.
Yeah. If people don't understand it, it goes over their head, and most things that go over your head, you don't gain much value from them. Okay? What else?
I don't think it's good to separate the family.
I want to come back to that one in a minute, though. What are the benefits or biblical models, biblical concepts that would teach us that it is a good thing at times, at a minimum, to split up the family for Christian discipleship and growth?
Because they had the women were to teach women, so that showed that it was by sex. It was like, oh, that was given to be taught.
Yeah. Older women, according to Titus 2, should be teaching younger women. Whether or not that's in the church or in the community is unclear, but yes, there's some places for that. And some of those discussions are best held separate. Then we're not just talking youth and adults, we're talking about gender. Okay? I think for the sake of evangelism that you can make a good argument that at times you should not just have the family together. I mean, imagine for a moment we'll do the teenage thing because we were doing it. Imagine for a moment being a 15-year-old that is intrigued by the things of the Lord, but you attend a church where it's largely expected and often articulated that people come, they sit with their family, they stay with their family, they go to Sunday school with their family. There's never a time that you're not with your family and your family doesn't go to church. You've now added on an extra layer of awkwardness just to them being present to understand the gospel by essentially suggesting if you don't come with your family, you're inferior.
You know, one of the places in the Bible might be like when Transfiguration, when only a few of the disciples went. It was a subset of the group that he wanted to teach a particular topic to.
Yeah. Jesus did not only convene with the crowds. Like, Jesus taught the crowds. Jesus had 12 apostles, and he had 3 in an inner circle that he spent more time with. Like, Jesus didn't just always hang out with everybody. So, yeah, I think you could argue from that as a biblical principle as well. Is that what you were going with? Okay. All right. What are some benefits of keeping the family together? Ms. Nancy, you wanted to jump in on that one.
Well, I think that there are times when they should be together because they're hearing the same message.
Mm-hmm.
And if they have questions, they can discuss it. They can come to it. Or if the kids maybe don't like it, but they can talk to them about it and help make it clear. And I in terms of support of children's church too,
Mm-hmm.
because that helps them with understanding what's going on. And they have activities, they have things, he preaches to them.
Mm-hmm.
And it helps them come to know Jesus Christ that way if they're not hearing it or getting bored in church, which sometimes happens.
We all get bored in church. Y'all get bored in church. You don't tell me right now. We're outside of Pastor Appreciation Month, so you can just, Pastor Jason, it is true, I get bored at church at times. Okay? I get it. We all get bored in church at times. But one of the lessons of actually keeping your family together in church is to remind them that getting bored in church doesn't mean you don't go to church. Yeah, pay attention. Church isn't just about you. Okay? It's not about you just having fun. We ought to rejoice in the Lord, the truth that God has for us, but that doesn't always make it simple, easy, and fun. The church is not Disney World, and it's not always a magical day. And if what is gained is, as Ms. Nancy said, the ability to discuss as a family the things of faith, What is gained is the ability to say church isn't just about you. So we don't have to have senior adult church and church for those that are, married without kids or have kids outside the home, and church for those that have elementary kids, and church for those that don't have kids yet, and church for those that aren't married. We don't have to have 12 different services for the 12 different types of people that exist.
Wouldn't it be the same service for all of them?
Oh, no. In the model of the church that I'm talking about, it is not the same pastor communicating. I don't even know if it's the same concepts being communicated. Just like right now, as in children's church, the material does not line up with the sermon because they're on a different curriculum to be communicated at their age. It is the philosophy of many churches that youth would prefer, and therefore they should gather together for a youth age lesson during the worship hour.
Children one thing, but youth another. They can understand more and pay attention better.
And children can learn more than we give them credit for.
Yes.
So, on good days when Jesse exits church, good days, not all days, good days when he exits church, his 30-second summary of my message was probably what I should have actually only preached.
So you should preach it to him first.
Yeah, get the 30-second version from him and then just come in and give it to you guys, and we can all get to lunch earlier. I like it. We can even beat the Catholics out. Good idea. All right. A couple of notes here. Let me look through. We could have more discussion on this, but this is a discussion that exists. By the way, this discussion has ramifications for when our teenagers go off to college. I think people should be in a church that doesn't have people that are just exactly like them, that are broader in scale. The family of God's not a family of nuclear families. Instead, it's a gathering of the true body of regenerate believers organized in the location. And churches should strengthen families, not run them ragged or always separate them. A couple other quotes I pulled from the book that are not in your notes. The church and family should partner together in bringing glory to God and respect and affirm each other's respective spheres. So, as the conversation I had with one of your children earlier tonight at dinner, do your parents like it when you ask that question? I don't think so. Okay, if your parents don't like it when you ask that question, then can you honor God by not asking me that question next week? I'm not upset with you at all about you asking that question, but God's put your parents in charge of you, and they don't really like it if you ask that question. So can you not ask me that question next week? Okay. In that moment, what I am trying to do is distinguish between me as pastor not being at all upset at something and trying to help one learn to honor parents within their home. By the way, at any point as parents, if you need me to have your back on something like that, just let me know. Because I may very well come to you at times for those same types of things. I have taken my boys to men from our church before. I remember when Roger Price was still at our church and one of my boys was struggling all the time with lying. Just all the time. Anything you'd ask him, he'd just lie. And I finally said, I can't get through to him. None of my versions of discipline are getting through, but he loves Roger Price. So I sat down and said, Roger, can you talk to him about what a man does and how a man honors God with his words? Roger sat down with him, had a heart-to-heart with him, talked to him about honesty, about integrity, about not lying, and it worked for at least 3 days, which was way longer than anything else that I'd done. And another one of my boys was struggling with obeying parents. So we sat him down with Josh Walter, one of our military guys, and we said, Josh, will you talk to our son that really loves the military about what happens in the military when you don't obey orders? He said, yeah, I got it. And so they had a little heart-to-heart on what happens in the military when you don't obey orders from your commanding officer. And he got a better understanding of what God intended for him to do in our home as an obedient child. So, now, those are things that have biblical ramifications, but the explicit playing them out in the case of some of those things are actually within the family for you to discipline and grow your children. So it is not my job as the pastor to inform you on how much time your kid can play video games. But if you've set a standard and your kid's struggling with it, by all means, I will absolutely affirm you in your role as a parent in that with your kid, and them to honor you by honoring the rules set in your home. It is not the church's job to raise your children, but to aid and equip you in raising them and discipling them in the things of the Lord. The church disciples in partnership with you. You discipline and disciple. Okay? We'll get to that in a few minutes. All right, having children for the glory of God. Are children a burden to be avoided? Are children a burden? Yes. Okay. Are they to be avoided? No. Uh-oh. I'm thankful that my mama didn't avoid having me or raising me, but at times, children are definitely burdensome. Psalm 127 reminds us that children are a fruit and a reward from the Lord, that it is a blessing to have them. In our world that does not often think of children as a blessing to have, it's important for us to think first about the blessing that children are, not the burden that they are in the pew. When they are crawling around, crying, displaying their sinful, broken selves, and displaying their immaturity, whether that is at age 2 weeks or whether that is at age 18. Children are a blessing. So let's be reminded that children are a blessing, and at times that can be really hard to remember that they are a blessing. Okay, in Mark 10, Jesus gathers and encourages them to bring the children to him. Jesus loves kids and loves to bless people with kids. In Genesis, we are told to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. That means having kids. Okay? Now, I want to note, not everybody has the opportunity to be blessed by having children. Okay? Not everybody. Those that are not married do not end up in God's plan with biological children. Okay? Others struggle deeply or never experience fertility.
I couldn't have children, but I adopted two, and then I raised my oldest grandson as my own child, so I was blessed.
Absolutely. And we can be blessed by those that are not our biological children, and I think that's awesome, Ms. Nancy, and I am so grateful for that and the way that you've honored you've imitated God's adopting love.
I figured he blessed me.
So, I want to cover quickly a concept on abortion and then get into a couple other things in here. So, abortion hinges not on convenience, but on personhood. Okay? The argument against abortion doesn't hinge on whether or not things are convenient. Kids are never convenient, by the way. And if you're waiting until you're ready to have kids, you will never have kids. Is the other thing I tell couples often in marriage counseling. All right.
It's murder.
If a fetus is a child, then it is wrong. Okay? It hinges on personhood. That is what makes abortion murderous, is personhood. So when personhood begins and how you measure personhood is difficult. However, I think it's valuable for us to look over in Exodus 21 for just a moment. Exodus 21, verse 22 through 25. When men strive together and hit a pregnant woman so that her children come out, but there is no harm, the one who hit her shall surely be fined, as the husbands shall impose on him, and he shall pay as the judge determines. So we got an issue here, but the issue is just fining. But if there is harm, then you shall pay life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. It is being argued here that in the case of the death and harm to the child that is in the womb, that is forced out through battle, through hand-to-hand combat or some version of that, that the penalty for the one that is guilty of harming that which was inside the womb is the same as the penalty as if that was a full-grown person. Exodus is suggesting and showing, I would say, not just suggesting, that personhood exists inside the womb, not just after birth. Now, when that begins is a little harder, and it's a deeper ethical debate. I'm not going to settle all of that because that is outside of our scope for tonight. But this relates in the case of some efforts at contraception. Contraception, an effort not to have the blessing of children or the burden of children in given situations. Okay, some positions articulate that, or some. Let me go with this. What denomination, religion often articulates that any efforts at contraception are wrong? Catholicism largely articulates that any effort at contraception are wrong. Okay? It's largely the position. Not often practiced by Catholics, but is largely been the official position. Okay? By the way, that is not limited to Catholics. The more that my family and I homeschool, the more we run into others within evangelical backgrounds that share that position. Okay? And by any, they mean any. They don't mean like pills, IUDs, those types of things. They mean any effort. They could even mean any effort as in following rhythm/calendar methods to attempt to not be blessed with a child. Okay? Natural family planning is planning, and we should not plan to not have a family because God has demanded that we create and be fruitful and multiply. So some would go that far even. Many would say, natural family planning, okay, and define that how they want to with rhythmic calendar methods. Some would say that barrier methods of contraception are acceptable from an ethical angle, but other methods are not. Okay? Are all methods of contraception wrong? I would not say all efforts at contraception are wrong, particularly being that is largely the Catholic position. Any effort is wrong. Is it possible? But are some methods of contraception wrong? Yes, I would say so. Okay? Contraception at that point is actually a bad term. I guess the better concept would not be contraception, but actually not having a child. Because abortion would fall under one of the means by which I would say not having a child is bad. I'm largely okay with things that count as contraception from the angle of creation, procreation. Whether or not it's good for the body is a different matter. Okay? But an effort such as an abortion-causing method would be wrong, I would say. Okay? Now, there's a big area between natural family planning and taking something or going to the doctor to have a D&C. There's a big range in there. What is right, Pastor Jason? Well, there's a lot of things that I think you need to work through, pray through, carefully sort out, discuss with other Christians that want to honor God, to celebrate the blessing of God that children are, while also being sensitive to health concerns, while also being sensitive to how methods of contraception work. Do they work to stop fertilization? Do they work to stop implantation? Do they work to dislodge implantation? What are their long-term ramifications? Okay? All sorts of discussion that is more nuanced than we're going to have in here tonight. I think those are things to be thinking through, to be careful about, to discuss with others. I'm of the opinion that I don't think you need to be out here and say any version of family planning at all is bad, but at the same time, I think there are some things that are out of bounds in terms of what God would intend. Okay? What about long-term sterilization? One of my pastors I served with before, I think he actually talked about with his dog at first, but he used to refer to it as going to get broken instead of going to get fixed. Okay? We took our dog to get broken. We did not take our dog to get fixed because God had fixed our dog to start off with. Our dog could have the blessing of puppies. We took our dog to get broken. What about getting your body broken from the ability to have children in the long term? Is that ethically okay? I can respect positions that would say yes or no with humility. And I think that's the big thing. Careful, prayerful, humble, kind with others that do not share your position and working through it. Okay? And by the way, submitting personal desires to the Spirit and prayerful consideration. Not my will, but your will be done, O Lord. How do you decide for yourself what you're going to do in that? How do you decide when your quiver, according to Psalm 127, is full? Careful, prayerful, and by God's guidance. And then, as my college roommate found out, just having your wife broken post-baby does not mean that you may not have another baby. Okay? She was broken post their fourth, and like 5 years later, he called me and he said, "You would not believe what is happening with my wife. She's having another baby." And I was like, "Didn't she get broken?" "Yeah, the doctors broke her. The doctors have now gone back in post that child and said, 'We broke you.' Well, we're not sure, but we don't need to fix your broken part. You're still broken. You're not supposed to have babies." And she had a baby. And they're treasuring God's blessing to them that is several years younger than all their others. So, okay. All right. I'm going to answer the question for you, audience in mind. Are all methods for increasing the likelihood of becoming a parent wrong? All methods for increasing the likelihood. Okay? Again, I'm giving you a little hint by like all. If the word all is in there, most of the time, I don't mean to take that as a good answer. Okay? The word all is here? No. Okay? All methods should not be considered out of bounds. Like, if you're seeking God's blessing for having a little one, then keeping track of a calendar of when that should actually occur for procreation purposes would probably be a good idea. That's an effort. Okay? Are all efforts within bounds? No. I don't think the Abraham plan with Hagar is a good plan. I think it was a dumb plan when he did it, and it's a dumber plan today. Okay? That is not a good way to honor God and grow your family. That does not work well. What about medically assisted versions of growing your family? Not just, hey, let's track on a calendar when a good time is to try to grow the family, or let's find somebody else to help us grow the family. Okay? What about medically assisted? Well, I think there's a series of things that we need to consider in how that medical technology is working. Is that working through the fertilization of embryos that are all going to be implanted, that are going to be selectively reduced at some point? Is it occurring through the donation of DNA material from others that are not in your home? I think there's some things that you need to think through carefully and prayerfully and at more detail than we're going to go into in the time that we have tonight. I'd love to discuss those types of topics with you or somebody else from our church, or read a specialized Christian book on family planning from an ethical viewpoint. Where do you agree? Where do you disagree with those things? Some things I think should be out of bounds, based upon honoring God's intention for life, based upon what is likely to result in the elimination or the murdering of younger ones in the womb. Okay? I think that one of the other things that should really be brought into mind is the great efforts and the great, at this point, financial cost to those that are seeking to become with child at any and all financial costs. Because not only are there ethical ramifications from the science and technology, but we are to glorify God with all of our lives, finances included, and what we do. And I am deeply grateful for authors like Tony Merida and his material on God as an adopting God, and how that means we as Christians ought to be adopting people who pattern our adopting love after the adopting love of God. For David Platt and some of the resources he's put out. And all too often, I think Christians have been guilty of pursuing technology as if the only way to be fulfilled and fruitful is to personally multiply rather than doing what God has done and adopting and displaying love. And displaying love, whether that's in long-term adoption or temporary fostering. That is a better model in many cases of the love of God than those that are given the biological blessing of children. It is not inferior, and it is a bigger and better picture of the gospel. It is beautiful, and something that beautiful should not be if all else fails and we run out of money, then we look at adoption plan. Particularly in light the plight of orphans in the U.S., largely in the foster care system, but the plight of orphans around the globe. Okay? You want to impact the globe for the Lord, consider adoption or foster care for those that deeply need those things. Or, God doesn't allow those things, aid with the next generation in your church. Serve with the next generation in the church. Love them well. Okay? All right, raising children for the glory of God. I'm going to have to blitz through this because, as usual, did not allocate my time well, but we did have a little discussion. And
You mean?
little. I was thinking more like that. For me, this is a pretty substantial amount of discussion tonight. All right. Raising children for the glory of God. All right, parents are tasked with both discipline and discipleship. I want to read from, one of you please navigate quickly to Proverbs 3, 11 and 12. Just read it when you get there.
Got it. My son, do not despise the Lord's discipline or be weary of his reproof. For the Lord reproves him whom he loves, as a father the son in whom he delights.
All right, so the ramifications of this verse is because God disciplines those he delights and loves, we ought to also discipline those that we love and delight in. Okay? So what does parental discipline look like? Methods of parenting, grandparenting. There's all sorts of models and plans and methods. And I note, borrowing from Kostenberger and Jones, that the relational plan is also a good plan where you customize according to the child that God has given you, learning from other things. Okay? I want to note in there, children are not simply disobedient. They are disobedient because they're sinners. And because they are sinners, they need salvation, not just discipline. The greatest goal in parenting is that your children love the Lord, not are just well-adjusted, well-behaved. Godly kids, not just good kids. Okay, Wegner is quoted in here, levels of discipline. Encouraging proper behavior, that's where you always want to start. Hey, here's what we're going for. Inform of improper behavior. Here's what wrong behavior is. Okay, we don't have to tell them about everything that's wrong if we can encourage right behavior. But sometimes you got to say, hey, this is what's wrong. Explaining the consequences of sin. Sin does not go well. It is not good for God or you. Good for God's glory or you. Okay? Gently exhort, advise and exhort against sin that can become a pattern. Encourage them to use wisdom. Gently rebuke or reprove. And then punishment that does not cause physical harm. A variety of passages there, by the way, from Proverbs about sparing the rod, spoiling the child, disciplining those you love, and not avoiding correcting those that you are entrusted with raising. Okay, I think it was Proverbs 29:15 that I wanted to hit at particularly. Yes. The rod and reproof give wisdom, but a child left to himself brings shame to his mother. Okay, I don't want to deal with the rod and reproof for a minute. I want to deal with the latter half. A child left to himself brings shame to his mother. There are way too many parents that have their children running their household. What my kid wants, they will get. I can't upset little Johnny. Okay? Little Johnny runs the household. A child left to themselves will almost always bring shame upon the parent in the long run. Rod and reproof give wisdom. So does that mean you should use physical discipline on your child? There's all sorts of studies out on it. A lot are overstatement and say that any version of physical discipline has immediately become physical abuse. Okay, I'm not of the opinion that any and all physical discipline is physical abuse. Okay? Making your kid do push-ups because they had a bad habit or lied or stole or something like that does not constitute physical abuse. If it does, I will be in jail very soon. We do all sorts of push-ups and all sorts of other things for physical punishment in our home at different ages and stages as the kids have grown. That looks vastly different, by the way, for our 16-year-old daughter than it did when my boys were 3. Okay? That looks different. It's not one size fits all. Punishment should fit the crime. Okay? But by the way, you are the parent, and God has put you, not your kid, in charge. But let me note, God has put you in charge, not your selfish desires in charge. Because it's all too easy to let our selfish desires become what rules. Okay? But shouldn't be selfish kid either. Okay? Wise parents use the least amount of punishment necessary to curb inappropriate behavior. Discipline should be consistent. All those, you can read all through those things. All right, discipleship. Already talked about partnering parents in the church. I gave you that long quote about we want kids who have an independent life under discipleship, didn't I? Okay, you can read that one on your own. We need input we get from wise other Christian parents. I even got some great input today from somebody in our office about an issue we're having in our home about kids not going to bed well. And it was essentially, is it keeping you from sleeping? No. Is it killing you then? No. Then you got to decide if it's going to be something you want to deal with or you want to let go as parents. Like, oh yeah, it's kind of like a selfish desire in me. It's not good for them, but I'm making a bigger deal out of this than it probably is. Good wisdom from other people. All right, I did not get to raising parents for the glory of God, but by the way, having children is another reason it's a blessing, is it shows us how God as Father takes care of us and His patience that is required for dealing with us. I think having children is a great way to reflect on God's parenting of us and grow in our relationship with Him. So to a large degree, we are raised as parents for the glory of God as we have children, but The other thing that I wanted to note on here is the way in which we are called, as 1 Timothy 5 noted, to continue to care for our parents as they age is a biblical thing, whether or not it's a cultural thing. And I think that extends by Paul's note to churches taking care of true widows or those whose families have treated them as widows by not being able to or willing to care for them. Okay? Not everybody that's willing is able. Not everybody that's able is willing. I think I said that correctly. Okay? So the church helps with those things and has a special responsibility to care for each other within the family of faith. Further study, if you want to look through some of the longer ramifications on avoiding having children or making efforts to have children, you can look at Kostenberger's book. It's a little dated in its terminology at this point. I think it's 13 years old, so there's a lot of new stuff out there, but it would lead you down some thinking paths. So, wrap up officially, and then I'll stick around for a few minutes for questions. So, God, thank you for your fatherly love, great patience. And God, though I do not enjoy it, thank you for your discipline that is for my good, for your glory. God, would we think rightly, lovingly, and graciously about these matters, that we might honor you as a church and as individual believers, whether we are single or have numerous kids or taking care of aging parents. So in your name we pray. Amen.